It's what my grandmother said whenever I had a want instead of a need. I wanted candy at the convenience store. I wanted a Barbie camper like the one in the Big Sears catalog. Whores in hell want ice water, she would say, but that don't mean they're getting any. This line shut down tantrums and whining, rich kids' luxuries. My 8-year-old self didn't know what a whore was. I only understood that my expectations, demands, my very heart's desire would not be met, at least not in this world. And arguing about it wouldn't make any difference. So I didn't wish for hamburgers and French fries when we had beans and cornbread. And I didn't mention that Pansy, our neighbor's daughter down the road, had a yellow remote-controlled Barbie Corvette. And I didn't mention that Pansy's mother hardly ever made beans and cornbread, or that her father always had pockets full of change for the gumball machine. I took what I got, a no-nonsense grandmother and parents who called from California. In 1975, I was 2 years old. My parents had left Clarksville, Texas, and gone to California looking for good jobs. But all they found was work cleaning offices for a defense company. And 6 years later, in 1981, they were still in California. But now my mother was working at a Dairy Queen, and my daddy was stocking shelves at a grocery store. I imagine that's not what they wanted either, but it's what they got. Why, hell, you didn't need to go all the way to California to stock shelves. You could do that at the Piggly Wiggly in town, I heard my grandmother say when my daddy called. And then my grandmother said to me, "It's your daddy," and handed me the phone. My daddy said what he always said when we talked on the phone. "You mindin' your granny?" I didn't know anybody who was stupid enough not to mind my grandmother. I suppose he didn't know what else to say to me, the little girl who he saw once a year, usually at Christmas. I didn't know what to say to him either, so I fidgeted with the phone's long, black, corkscrewed cord. And then I heard my father handing the phone to my mother, and she said what she always said to me, "You all right?" I was fine, but my mother didn't sound fine. Her voice was soft and tissue paper thin. Then my mother would say, "Love you," just like that. And she might as well have said, "Shoo," because I didn't feel a thing. But I always said, "Love you too," because I knew it would be rude not to say it back. I studied the pictures of my parents, Paula Lee and Ray Smalls, on the side table in my grandmother's living room. There was a picture of my mother with a blank, startled look and her halo of an afro. And there was a separate picture of my father with his crooked, rakish smile. I would stand in front of the mirror in my grandmother's room and look at my mouth. I could see the Cupid's bow of my top lip was a lot like my mother's, but my mouth wasn't as full as hers. My lips were thinner, like my father's. And my eyes? They didn't look like either of my parents. My grandmother said I had my grandfather's almond-shaped eyes. And when she said this, she softened, like butter left out, and gently cupped my chin in her hand and smiled at me. And though my grandfather had died long before I was born, I loved him for giving me eyes that would make my grandmother look at me like that. What I lacked in parents, I had in my grandmother, with her soft hands and hard Depression-era values. She drew hot water for baths. She scrubbed hard and loved even harder. She recited the poetry of Paul Laurence Dunbar and James Weldon Johnson because she wanted me to know there were Negroes, as she called us, who wrote poems. And occasionally, she recited nursery rhymes like none I'd ever heard. They were frayed threads pulled from the past, a time when this little piggy wasn't a piggy at all. Once at bedtime, she took my big toe between her fingers and started, "This little nigga said, I want some corn." She didn't smile or laugh. She just moved on to the next toe. "This little nigga said, where you gonna get it?" She continued on to the next toe. "Out of Massa's barn." She tugged gently on the next toe. "This little nigga said, I'm gonna tell it." And at the last toe, she said, This little nigger cried wee, wee, wee all the way home. She pulled the sheet up over me. Go to sleep now, she said, and she sealed it all with a kiss on my forehead. I lay there, flummoxed, still feeling the gentle pressure of her kiss on my forehead, while the sing-songy rhythm of the verses collided with words like nigga and massa. Did Pansy's mama recite nursery rhymes like this to her at night? Did she lie in bed hearing about little niggas thwarted in their longing for corn? I knew she didn't. My grandmother had shared some pieces of the past, passed down to her and now to me like some tattered and strange doll. And I held on to it, who we were and where we came from. This was our nursery rhyme, my nursery rhyme, whether I wanted it or not. This was just an extension of my grandmother's love. Her love was not a feeling, cloying and heavy as pound cake. Her love was strident. It yelled at me to stay in the front yard where she could see me from the porch. It was meticulously washed and ironed clothes, leftover pot roast and vegetables cooked into hash that would last and last when we were hungry. Her love was a firm hand combing and plaiting my hair at night. Her love swore, careful getting in and out of that bathtub, you'll fall and bust your damn head open. Her love was ever vigilant in its pursuit of any one or thing, accident or natural disaster, that might come between us. It was this same vigilance that had her stand up on the porch one summer evening and stare up at the sky. I remember running through the yard, the tiny spikes of the St. Augustine grass pricking the soles of my feet. And then my grandmother announced, "Devil must be beating his wife." This is what my grandmother said when dark clouds in the east twisted like dirty dish rags in the sky, while the sun shined in the west. I didn't know what the devil had to do with the weather, or that he had a wife for that matter. I lingered in the front yard, looking up at the sky while the sun shined down on me and drops of rain dappled my face and body. "Come on in this house now," my grandmother said. Inside, we sat quietly on her bed, the way we always did when a storm stomped its way across the Texas plains. No TV, no radio, no man-made electronics to distract us. If I tried to say anything to my grandmother during a storm, she would reply, "Hush now." So I didn't say a word. The only other time she forced me to be this quiet was when we prayed at church. Maybe the good Lord, as she called God, would take our quiet reverence into account and leave our house standing. The lightning lit up the house like someone had turned on all the lights for a split second, and the thunder made a sound like someone ripping the sky open. I nestled in close to my grandmother as we sat through the call and response of lightning and thunder, waiting for it to dwindle down to a distant grumble. And then the doorbell rang. I jumped. Whoever was at the door tapped on the doorbell a few more times and then started to knock. "What in the?" my grandmother said. I followed her to the front door, afraid to be alone in the storm. Through the splatter of heavy rain, I heard my father's voice. "It's me, Mama. Open the door."